The room went quiet right as my name left his mouth, not with praise, but like a warning label. And effective immediately, my boss said, fingers laced, voice smug, your role will be restructured. Restructured. I stood there, still holding my notebook, as he gestured to the man beside him. Smiling, relaxed, already sitting in my chair. The chair I'd earned through 9 years of 60-hour weeks and projects that saved this company millions. The chair where I'd built systems that ran so smoothly, people forgot they needed building at all. Applause broke out around the conference table. Polite, uncomfortable applause that sounded hollow against the glass walls. I felt my ears ring. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright. My vision tunneled until all I could see was that man in my chair, adjusting the height like he owned it. I smiled because I had to. My jaw locked. My hand tightened around the pen until my fingers hurt, until I felt the plastic threatening to crack. No one looked at me directly. They clapped while staring at their hands or the table or anywhere but my face. They knew what this was. He wouldn't either. My boss, Victor Brennan, just sat there with that satisfied expression, like he'd solved a problem instead of creating one. He nodded once in my direction, like this was mercy. Like he was doing me a favor by keeping me employed at all. The man in my chair, Marcus something, reached across the table to shake hands with the department heads. His handshake was firm and confident, the handshake of someone who'd never had to earn anything. That was the moment my 9 years were erased in under 30 seconds. 9 years of arriving first and leaving last. 9 years of fixing problems before they became disasters. 9 years of being told I was essential, invaluable, the person who made everything work. This is the story of how my boss demoted me after nearly a decade, and handed my position to his friend. A friend who couldn't tell a quarterly projection from a grocery list. And how that decision dismantled everything he thought was untouchable. Because Victor Brennan made one critical mistake. He assumed I'd stay quiet. That I'd accept this humiliation with a grateful smile and fade into whatever corner he'd prepared for me. He assumed wrong. My name is Paulina Walsh. And until that morning, I was the backbone of that department. Senior Operations Manager at Cascade Technologies, a mid-sized software consulting firm in Portland. I'd built the project management framework that every team used. I'd streamlined processes that cut delivery times by 40%. I'd personally trained half the managers currently sitting in that conference room, avoiding my eyes. I was 36 years old, never married, no children. This job was everything I'd worked for since graduating college. My entire adult identity wrapped up in those glass walls and the satisfaction of solving impossible problems. My apartment was 20 minutes from the office. My closest friends were co-workers. My calendar revolved around product launches and client deadlines. And now, apparently, none of it mattered. I remembered staying late while everyone else went home. Remembered fixing mistakes that weren't mine, covering for team members who couldn't handle the pressure, making my boss look competent when his decisions nearly tanked projects. Remembered being told, "You're indispensable, Paulina. I don't know what we'd do without you." Remembered the promises. Next promotion cycle, absolutely. You're at the top of the list. Remembered 3 consecutive years of those same promises, always followed by reasons why this wasn't quite the right time. Budget constraints. Organizational restructuring. The nebulous optics of promoting someone too quickly, even though 9 years was apparently too quick. Turns out, indispensable just means convenient. Useful. Someone reliable enough to exploit and powerless enough to ignore. The man in my chair hadn't earned it. His name was Marcus Holbrook, and he was Victor's old college buddy. Same laugh, loud and performative. Same inside jokes that made everyone else feel excluded. Same country club membership. Same alma mater connections that opened doors without effort. Zero experience in operations management. His background was in sales, and from what I'd gathered during Victor's introduction, not particularly successful sales. He'd been exploring opportunities for the past year, which seemed like code for unemployed. But he had the right connections. The right background. The right easy charm that made men like Victor feel comfortable. And apparently, that was worth more than my 9 years of proven excellence. They called my demotion a lateral move. You'll be transitioning to a project coordinator role, Victor had explained after the meeting, his tone suggesting he expected gratitude. Same pay grade, just different responsibilities. We need someone with your attention to detail in a more focused position. Smaller office. Actually, not even an office, a cubicle near the supply closet. No team reporting to me. No authority to make decisions or approve budgets. No seat at the leadership table where strategy got decided. Just enough responsibility to keep me useful, handling administrative tasks, scheduling meetings, tracking deliverables, and quiet. Busy enough not to complain. Visible enough to remind everyone what happened when you weren't Victor's friend. My new lateral role was what junior employees did fresh out of college. I needed this job. Mortgage on a small condo I'd bought 2 years ago, convinced my career trajectory was secure. Medical bills from my mother's cancer treatment the previous year. She'd survived, but the costs hadn't. Student loans I was still paying off at 36 because I'd worked full-time while earning my MBA at night. No safety net. No wealthy family to fall back on. No spouse's income to cushion the blow. Walking out wasn't bravery, it was financial suicide. The job market was tight. I had specialized skills, but also a reputation of working at one company for 9 years. Recruiters would wonder why I'd stayed so long without advancement. Why I was suddenly available. So I stayed. Swallowed my pride. Packed up my office and moved into that cubicle. That night, I didn't cry. I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine I barely touched, opened my laptop, and started documenting everything. Every project I'd led. Every system I'd designed. Every process improvement I'd implemented. I created folders organized by year, by initiative, by measurable impact. I saved emails where colleagues thanked me for solving problems. Where clients specifically requested me for their projects. Where Victor himself had praised my work. I backed everything up: cloud storage, external hard drive, printed copies in a locked drawer. I didn't know exactly what I was preparing for. But my instincts, honed through 9 years of anticipating problems before they exploded, told me I'd need evidence. Proof of my contributions that couldn't be rewritten or erased. It didn't take long to see the pattern. Projects I'd built, systems I'd designed, suddenly credited to Marcus. In meetings, he'd present strategies I'd developed, using my exact phrasing, my specific frameworks. Sometimes he'd stumble over the details because he didn't actually understand the underlying logic. Emails got rewritten. Project histories mysteriously updated. Organizational charts changed to show Marcus had been involved in initiatives he'd never touched. Victor wasn't just arrogant, he was sloppy. He assumed institutional memory was short. That people wouldn't notice the sudden attribution changes. That success could be transferred like property, handed from one person to another without consequence. He was wrong on all counts. But I didn't correct him. Not yet. Because I was beginning to understand something important: his sloppiness was my advantage. I didn't confront him. Didn't vent to coworkers, tempting as that was during lunch breaks when they offered sympathetic looks. Didn't hint at my resentment or anger. I became invisible and observant. From my cubicle near the supply closet, I had a surprisingly useful vantage point. I could hear conversations people thought were private. Could see who came and went, who looked stressed, who was struggling. I attended meetings I was technically required to be in as coordinator, sitting quietly in the back, taking meticulous notes. Notes about decisions made. Promises given. Responsibilities assigned. I answered emails promptly and professionally. Never complained about my reduced role. Smiled politely when Marcus asked me to schedule his meetings or prepare his presentations. And I watched everything fall apart, slowly, predictably, like a building with a cracked foundation. 2 weeks later, Marcus missed his first major deadline. The Henderson account, one of our largest clients, had requested a comprehensive project timeline for their digital transformation initiative. It required coordinating across 4 departments, understanding technical constraints, and managing stakeholder expectations. I'd handled dozens of these. Marcus handled it by delegating the work to junior staff he didn't know how to manage, then disappearing for a 3-hour lunch. The timeline he submitted was nonsensical. Dependencies were wrong. Resource allocation impossible. Deadlines contradicted contractual obligations. The client complained directly to Victor, copying executive leadership. I watched the email chain unfold from my cubicle, saying nothing. Victor stepped in to fix it, using my old process. The one I'd developed 3 years ago and documented thoroughly. The one that worked, if you understood why each step mattered. I didn't correct him when he got it wrong. Victor tried to replicate my framework but missed crucial elements. He compressed timelines without adjusting resource allocation. Made promises the technical team couldn't fulfill. Created dependencies that would bottleneck the entire project. I saw the problems immediately. Could have fixed them in an hour. Could have saved everyone weeks of chaos and potential client loss. I let him take credit for the solution. Watched him present it confidently in a meeting where Marcus nodded along, relieved to have the problem handled. Because I knew something Victor didn't. The system only worked if you understood it. If you knew which pieces were flexible and which were load-bearing. If you'd built it from the ground up through trial and error and lived experience. They were about to learn that lesson the expensive way. 3 weeks after my demotion, a client emailed me directly. Catherine Wu from the Henderson account, someone I'd worked with for 2 years. Her message was professional but pointed. Paulina, can you clarify why the implementation approach changed? The new timeline doesn't align with our technical constraints. She'd noticed. Of course she had. Catherine was sharp, thorough, exactly the kind of client who made projects successful because she asked the right questions. I answered politely. Factually. Explained that I was no longer managing the account but outlined the specific technical concerns her team should raise with current management. Provided documentation of the original approach and why those constraints existed. And I CC'd Victor, Marcus, and senior leadership. Not aggressively. Not vindicatively. Just transparently, professionally, ensuring everyone had the same information. The email landed like a grenade in a quiet room. Suddenly, there was a meeting. Not with me, about me. I learned about it from Tyler, a project manager I'd trained, who felt guilty enough about my demotion to give me a heads up. They're questioning how things were done before, he whispered near the coffee machine. Victor looks panicked. He's claiming there were documentation problems with your old processes. The meeting happened that afternoon. Executive leadership, department heads, Victor, Marcus, and the Henderson account team on video conference. And then 20 minutes in, someone asked the question that changed everything. Can we bring Paulina in? She designed the original framework. I was asked to walk everyone through my methodology. To explain the logic behind decisions that Marcus and Victor had casually dismissed. I'd been preparing for this moment without knowing it. All those late nights documenting processes. All those backup files. All that carefully archived evidence. As I spoke, Victor's smile faded. I pulled up my documented processes, versions dated back 4 years, showing evolution and refinement. I walked through case studies of similar projects, explaining why certain approaches worked and others failed. I addressed Catherine's concerns directly, acknowledging her technical constraints and showing exactly how my original framework accommodated them. I wasn't defensive. Wasn't emotional. Just thorough, professional, and undeniably expert. Victor tried to interject twice, trying to reframe decisions as collaborative. Both times, the executive leadership asked him to hold his questions until I finished. Marcus sat silent, his earlier confidence completely gone. He couldn't contribute because he didn't understand any of it. The complexity he'd dismissed as overcomplicated was actually elegant problem-solving he lacked the expertise to recognize. Victor realized, too late, that I wasn't replaceable. I was irreplaceable. And he'd just demonstrated that publicly, in front of the leadership team and our second-largest client. The following week, leadership requested a comprehensive performance review of the entire operations department. Metrics, timelines, accountability, budget compliance, client satisfaction scores. Everything that could be measured and compared, before and after my demotion. Everything Victor hated because numbers didn't care about connections or college friendships or comfortable assumptions. The review would take 2 weeks, they announced. All current projects would be audited. All stakeholder feedback compiled. All process changes documented and evaluated. I watched Victor's face turn ashen during the announcement. He understood what this meant. His casual restructuring, justified with vague claims about new direction and fresh perspectives, was about to face empirical scrutiny. Meanwhile, I continued my coordinator duties quietly. Scheduled meetings. Tracked deliverables. Answered questions from confused team members trying to navigate systems that no longer functioned smoothly. The audit results were devastating. Someone in leadership asked the question that mattered: who designed the systems we currently depend on? Every document led back to me. 9 years of fingerprints. Project files with my name in the metadata. Email threads showing my problem solving. Training materials I'd created. Process documentation with my revision history. Client testimonials specifically mentioning my contributions. The data was undeniable. Before my demotion, the department had operated at 94% efficiency. Client satisfaction scores averaged 4.7 out of 5. Project delivery met deadlines 89% of the time. After my demotion, in just 4 weeks, efficiency had dropped to 73%. Client satisfaction fell to 3.9. Deadline compliance dropped to 62%. The Henderson account had formally requested a meeting to discuss concerns about recent service quality changes. 2 other major clients had submitted similar feedback, all within the same month. The numbers told a story Victor couldn't talk his way out of. Marcus, placed under scrutiny he'd never expected, faltered completely. In meetings with leadership, he couldn't answer basic questions about operational methodology. Couldn't explain the rationale behind process decisions. Couldn't articulate strategy beyond surface-level generalities. When pressed on specific project challenges, he looked to Victor for help, and got silence. Victor had created this problem but couldn't solve it without admitting his friend was unqualified. Each time Marcus stumbled, Victor's judgment got called into question. "I thought you said he had extensive operational experience," the CFO noted dryly during one meeting I wasn't supposed to know about but heard through the grapevine. "This doesn't seem extensive." Marcus started arriving late and leaving early. Started skipping meetings. The stress of being exposed as fundamentally unqualified was visible in his hunched shoulders and avoiding eye contact. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then came the budgets. During the audit, the finance team discovered something interesting: significant budget overruns in operations, all approved in the past month. Expedited vendor contracts at premium rates. Consultant fees for problems that shouldn't have needed outside help. Rush charges for work that used to be handled internally. All the costs associated with scrambling to fix problems that competent management would have prevented. Every approval signature was Victor's. Every rushed decision, every expensive shortcut, every consultant brought in to patch systems that were breaking down, all traced back to one person. Not me. I'd been methodical about budget efficiency. Had relationships with vendors that got us favorable rates. Knew how to prevent problems instead of expensively fixing them after the fact. The overruns totaled nearly $200,000 in 4 weeks. Projected annually, that was a crisis-level number. Victor's cost-saving restructuring was bleeding money catastrophically. Human resources didn't raise their voices when they called Victor in. They didn't need to. The numbers raised them instead. The client complaints. The demonstrable decline in performance. The expensive chaos masquerading as leadership. I learned what happened through Tyler again, who'd heard it from someone in finance. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. Victor had tried to explain, to justify, to redirect blame toward transition challenges and inevitable adjustment periods. But his arrogance had done the work for them. He'd created such a clear before and after comparison that even the most generous interpretation couldn't save him. He'd demoted his most valuable employee to hire an unqualified friend. The decision had measurable, immediate, expensive consequences. And he'd made it unilaterally, without proper vetting or consultation. Leadership couldn't overlook that kind of judgment failure. Not without setting a precedent that would destroy company culture completely. I was called into a private office the following Monday. Not HR. Not Victor's office. The executive suite, where I'd only been twice before for company-wide celebrations. Brenda Castellano, our CEO, sat across from me. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, with a reputation for fairness but low tolerance for incompetence. "I owe you an apology," she said, which was not how I'd expected this conversation to start. "Your demotion should never have happened." It reflected poor judgment at multiple levels of leadership. I stayed quiet, waiting. "We're not here to apologize, though apologies are owed," she continued. "We're here to offer you something better than what you had before." She slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a position description I'd never seen before: Director of Operations. A new role, created specifically to address the organizational gaps the audit had revealed. Higher than my previous position. Direct line to executive leadership. My own team, expanded budget authority, and autonomy to rebuild the department properly. The salary made my breath catch. It was 40% more than my previous role. Equity options. Performance bonuses. The kind of compensation that reflected actual value instead of convenient exploitation. "We're also restructuring leadership accountability," Brenda said. "Victor Brennan has resigned, effective immediately. Marcus Holbrook's contract has been terminated." I processed that. Not demoted. Not reassigned. Gone. "I want to be clear about something," Brenda continued. "This isn't charity or compensation for what happened to you. Though we recognize that was unjust. This is a business decision. You're the most qualified person for this role, and we need you to fix what's been broken." I thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation. The anger. The careful documentation. The patience. "I accept," I said. "But I'll need authority to restructure processes and personnel as I see fit. No interference, no overrides from people who don't understand operations." Brenda smiled. "Done. That's specifically included in your role description. Build the department you need." I passed Victor in the hallway 2 days later as he cleaned out his desk. His office had been emptied of the personal items that had marked his territory: golf trophies, framed photos from company retreats, the expensive whiskey set he'd kept in his cabinet for impressing clients. He was putting a box of files into a larger container, moving with the defeated slowness of someone whose identity had been built on a position he no longer held. He saw me coming and froze. For a moment, I thought he might say something. Offer an excuse, or maybe even an apology. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. Just looked down at his hands, at the box, at anything but my face. I didn't smile. Didn't gloat. Didn't say any of the things I'd imagined saying during those first furious nights after my demotion. I didn't need to. My new office was 3 doors down. My new title was on the organizational chart. My new authority was absolute. Revenge didn't require words. Success was louder than anything I could have said. I didn't win by yelling or threatening to quit or making dramatic scenes that would have felt satisfying but accomplished nothing. I won by knowing my worth, and letting arrogance destroy itself. Victor's mistake wasn't just demoting me. It was assuming that competence was transferable, that results came from position rather than expertise, that relationships mattered more than capability. He'd built his career on connections and comfort, surrounding himself with people who wouldn't challenge him. When that strategy failed publicly and expensively, he had nothing to fall back on. Meanwhile, I'd built my career on results. On skills that were documented and measurable. On relationships based on competence rather than convenience. If someone ever tries to replace you with favoritism, remember this: they don't remove you because you're weak. They do it because they think you won't fight back. And the smartest revenge? Thriving so hard they can't rewrite history. 6 months later, my department had the highest performance metrics in company history. Client satisfaction was at 4.9. We'd won 3 major accounts specifically because of our operational efficiency. I'd been profiled in an industry publication about innovative management approaches. Marcus Holbrook was working at his family's car dealership. Victor Brennan was consulting, which meant unsuccessfully looking for his next position. And I was exactly where I'd earned the right to be, leading, succeeding, and proving every single day that competence eventually wins. Not always immediately. Not always fairly. But always inevitably, if you're patient enough to let arrogance collapse under its own weight. That's the lesson I learned from the worst professional experience of my life. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being undeniable.